Yo YouTube, what's up? Happy New Year's, and today we will be going over the new card Rocket Raccoon and Groot. I'll be going over my first impressions, pros and cons, and just a couple of decks that I've found to have worked with him after playing with him a little bit today. So let's hop right into it. So starting out with the card, Rocket Raccoon and Groot is a 3/3. You can move this once after your opponent plays a card here, still 1 power from it. So essentially, you get punished for playing in the same lane as this card. It'll steal 1 power for each card you play. So this card, essentially, with 1 card being played in the same lane as it, its net power gain is a 3/5 with just 1 card. So this can scale pretty high. It's been pretty good. Spoiler alert, it's been really good actually. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I do think it kind of stays in that area. We'll see as time goes on throughout the week and see what other people think, but I personally think it's a 4 out of 5. Just some of the pros of this card. So the first part of Rocket Raccoon and Groot's ability makes it hard to avoid playing a card in the same lane as it. The moving ability coupled with the power drain forces opponents to make suboptimal plays and gives you pseudo control over their plays. So the ability in and of itself makes you scared to play in the lane unless you don't care about your 1 power being drained. Most times you will, because that will be detrimental to the game plan that you're trying to go through with, right? So Rocket Raccoon in and of itself is a control card. It's also a power scaler, because going from a 3/3 to a 3/4 to a 3/5 to a 3/6, you're slowly just making this card stronger, and it's slowly just kind of creating kind of discourse on your side of the field. Second point, the moving ability allows Rocket and Groot to reach restricted locations. You could potentially build Rocket and Groot up before moving them. Power drain is effectively a +2 on power on the board. This card's power ceiling can get high extremely fast. Now, the moving part of the ability is very strong. I even played a game today where I was able to get into Sanctum Sanctorum because of the moving part of the ability. So it is something that's there. I would say that it's not the main focus of the deck, but you can always use the moving ability to reposition Rocket and Groot into a specific lane that you need them to be. Things happen. Sometimes you put a card in the wrong place. Sometimes you put a card there thinking they might want to put their cards there, and it doesn't work the way that you want it to. So, you know, the moving ability kind of helps with that. And the third point is the generic nature of this card's ability allows it to be flexible and being played in many different decks. Now, personally, I've tried it in only 2 different archetypes, but I think as time goes on, it will definitely reach way more. Probably about 3 or 4 different archetypes. And speaking of that, I have a couple at the top left. So here's our bread and butter section. So this section is just typically going over archetypes and cards that will work perfectly with Rocket and Groot. Starting off with move, we have Kraven, Miles, and Scream. From my testing today, these cards definitely work very well with him. Moving Rocket and Groot will activate Miles if you needed to. Scream already steals power, you know, just like Rocket and Groot does, so there's just like extra synergy there. And Kraven, when you move Rocket and Groot to his location, he gets that +2 power. So it just fits perfectly in those kind of move type decks. Surfer, I haven't tried Surfer yet, but I have tried some Jean Grey, and I believe that this card will find itself in Surfer definitely, because it's almost as if they keep making really good 3-drops better than the previous standard 3-drop, right? First it was Nocturne, and then it was Copycat, Red Guardian, and now we have Rocket and Groot. It's insane how good 3-cost cards are, and Surfer just continues to eat, you know. And Control, so I put Jean Grey here twice because I personally think that Jean Grey has gotten better because of this card. It is a bit awkward that Jean Grey is a 3-cost card and Rocket and Groot is also a 3-cost card, so you kind of have like a problem there when you want to both play them on turn 3, but it ends up working out, right? It ends up working out, especially with some of the decks that you go. Lizard is another great way. That's a curve option to force them to play in that lane. You just don't want a Lizard sitting there that's a 2/5, right? You want to knock that Lizard down to 2/1. Well, I'm gonna punish you for it. You want to knock my Lizard down? Well, you're gonna get your power stolen. So it's kind of like they kind of go hand to hand. Same thing with Nebula and Lizard kind of apply that same pseudo control. And White Widow, unless they completely give up on the White Widow lane, they will play in that lane to destroy the White Widow token that you can also just Red Guardian. So it's actually a pretty toxic combo. I personally don't have White Widow, but I do believe that if White Widow are in these decks with Lizard and Jean Grey and Nebula, that deck will definitely pop off. Just can't wait to get her again. And let's move on to some of the cons that I found. So some of the cons that I found with Rocket and Groot is the earlier you play this card, the better, right? Rocket and Groot can feel really bad to play later in the game, especially if you do not have turn priority. I definitely felt this today when testing the card. If I play Rocket and Groot out on like turn 5, it feels really bad. Turn 4 feels not as bad, but again, you want to play this on curve. You want to get it out as early as possible because that's just how the ability works. You want to get those power steals. Point 2, Rocket and Groot gets countered by popular meta cards such as Luke Cage, Scream, and Shadow King. Now we have some of the counters at the top left. Those cards definitely counter you. Any game that I've played where I've gone against a Luke Cage has kind of been pretty rough. It does help that Rocket and Groot gets the power that he's stealing, like he actually gets it for his overall power. So that has helped with kind of like keeping up with some of these Luke Cage decks. But Shadow King has been devastating at times. I personally haven't gone against a Scream deck, but you can always control when you move Groot. So it is a counter, but it's not too bad of a counter, I would say. But yeah, some of these very popular cards, especially Red Guardian, who completely shuts down Rocket and Groot, they're very strong in the meta. So definitely be on the lookout for that. And the third point is misplays are bound to happen when attempting to predict your opponent plays by moving this card. So if you put down a Lizard on Nebula, you're expecting them to go into that lane. Sometimes they don't, because they're expecting you to place your Rocket and Groot there and for you to kind of manipulate them to go into that lane. So it's kind of a mind game that I found that people do. This is just like really high level of play stuff where people, they kind of like try to outsmart what you're trying to outsmart them with, and it's pretty crazy at times. But there's only 3 lanes and there's only so much space. So Rocket and Groot, even though if you happen to place him in the wrong lane, he can still move. You know, you put him in a lane with Nebula, they don't play there, move him over to another lane they might play in, or keep him there. It's all about mind games. And while this is a con for Rocket and Groot, I also think that is somewhat of a pro. So yeah, let's move on to some of the decks that I found that have worked for me. So these are the 2 decks that I have found that have worked really well for Rocket and Groot. Just a little bit of an insight on some of these decks. Control cards will force cards into Rocket and Groot's lane, while move scalers will greatly appreciate another move card. So the 2 decks that I naturally gravitated to was a control based deck where I'm forcing my opponent to play in the same lane, and Scream, because Scream is a deck where it loves to have those filler cards to kind of take up the space when you don't get your move enablers like Kraven and Scream and Kingpin, right? So the first deck here is Scream for me. It's a move ramp affliction deck. And the deck is pretty interesting because it has Nebula in it, right? Which usually isn't in Scream decks, but Nebula is just another way to kind of like subtly force your opponent to play in that same lane. You have Kraven and Scream in the deck to have those like move enablers and those power gainers, right? Rocket and Groot obviously is in the deck to just to catch, you know, still and to put himself in a position where he can kind of scale off of Kraven's power. Luna Snow. Now I put Luna Snow into this deck because I personally find that a ramp option in Scream decks, specifically Luna, works pretty well. She creates an ice cube on the enemy side of the field for you to move around and to further create affliction or gain power off of. So, you know, it's a card that not everyone has. I know she just came out, but I do think that she's very good in this deck. Polaris is just generic 3 cost move card. Same thing with Spider-Man. I put Miles in this deck only because there's going to be times where that 1/6 is just very useful, and Scream can sometimes fall behind on power if you haven't gotten your early move cards. Stegron, Aero are just typical Scream cards, and Heimdall. So I put Heimdall in this deck because it's one of those things where it's like they don't expect it. Usually you could replace Heimdall with possibly Goliath, or you can even replace Luna from earlier, right? With you can replace Luna with Cassandra Nova if you have her. I just think that's another great card that you can play to replace Luna, and you can replace Heimdall with Goliath. But Heimdall is definitely a card that you can play that they won't expect. It'll also allow your Kraven to get really high in power. All those cards moving all together, he'll usually go from being like a 2/3, 2/5 to being like a 2/9, right? Or 2/11. It can really scale pretty fast. And the final card here is Magneto. So Magneto is your final mover. Just big boy Magneto. You know, moving those 3s and 4 cost cards are just huge at times, and it's kind of really hard to take him out this deck. If you have Cannonball, I would replace Cannonball with Heimdall, or possibly replace Cannonball with Miles Morales. But I don't have Cannonball personally, but this deck has still worked perfectly fine for me. Moving on to the second deck. So this is an ongoing control clog deck. I kind of listed these in order. It's more of an ongoing control deck than it is really clog. Essentially, it's an ongoing spectrum deck. What makes this deck different is it runs Nebula, it runs Negasonic, it runs Red Guardian, and it runs Rocketandgroot, right? That package right there, the Nebula, the Negasonic, Red Guardian, and Rocketandgroot is a nice little package that can probably almost fit into a lot of decks. They're very generic cards all around the board. And your essential game plan with this, right, is to get Ant-Man down early or get Nebula down early. You want to place Lizard in a lane so you can bait them to that lane, or you want to place Mojo to a lane so that they avoid that lane. Nobody wants to play into a lane where there's a Mojo, right? Because most times if you're playing a Mojo, you got your next 3 cost card coming up, Jean Grey. Jean Grey will now force people to play in the Mojo lane. When that lane is full, Mojo becomes a 2/8. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you avoid the Mojo lane and I have Jean Grey, it doesn't matter. You're gonna have to play in that lane. So you throw Jean Grey down, you throw down Rocket Raccoon and Groot, and you just start scaling off of all of that extra power. So that's essentially the plan there. Negasonic is also here so that when they play into Jean Grey, it's just a card that'll get blown up. Just a really good kind of synergy play you have going on right there. You have War Machine here. War Machine is to just help you get into locations that you can't usually get into. It's also just a generic 4/6 ongoing card that will kind of just benefit from the Spectrum buff late game. Blue Marvel is kind of a it's the 5 cost card here that'll you'll benefit the most from just playing on 5. Claw can sometimes not really help you out depending on where the locations are and where you can play him, but Blue Marvel just generally works across the board, and Spectrum buffs him as well. Claw is there to get into locations that you probably wouldn't be able to if you didn't pull War Machine and Spectrum. Now Spectrum here is a low-key winner. Most of this deck is ongoing. If you structure your plays correctly, you can have it so that these lanes get very high very fast. Between Blue Marvel, between Spectrum, and just how high that Ant-Man can scale, how high that Mojo can go, it doesn't even matter if they fill a lane against Lizard, because the Spectrum buff on top of all this other cards that are just scaling so high, it's insane. And Rocketandgroot just kind of like throws it over the top. It punishes them for even trying to play the game essentially. So yeah, that's the 2 decks that I came up with. The deck codes will be in the comments, in the description. My overall thoughts on Rocketandgroot is that it's a 4 out of 5 card, 4 out of 5 5-star card. It's really good, honestly. I don't know if it's full 5-star. I think as time goes on, it'll only get better as we get better control cards, or cards that that will synergize more with power drain and just, you know, affliction and things like that. But yeah, just I think it's definitely a good pickup. It's worth the tokens, it's worth the spotlight keys. So yeah, guys, definitely pick it up. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. And happy New Year's, man. Happy New Year's. We're about to go into 2025. It's gonna be a huge year. I hope we're you know, we're on the ride together, because 2025 is the year, man. We all gonna do what we got to do that year. So, you know, just happy New Year's, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.